Some secrets do not stay buried. They wait. They wait behind marble walls and silk curtains, behind smiling portraits and polished crowns, until one man finally decides to open the door. In the kingdom of Aldermere, that man was Crown Prince Edmund. And the day he signed a single order, the entire palace stopped breathing. What he did next would tear open a wound the royal family had spent 30 years hiding. Stay with this story, because what you are about to hear did not just change a fortune, it changed who would truly rule. It began on an ordinary gray morning. The old King Havard was resting in the East Wing, weak from a long illness, when Crown Prince Edmund walked into the Treasury office without warning. He carried no guards, no advisors, only a thin leather folder. The clerks rose in panic. Edmund placed the folder on the head clerk's desk and spoke 4 quiet words that would echo for months. Freeze the Marguerite accounts. For a moment, no one moved. Lady Marguerite was the king's second wife, the woman who had entered the palace as a widow and slowly, carefully, gathered more influence than anyone had noticed. Her private estate fund, drawn from the crown's oldest holdings, was untouchable, or so everyone had believed. The head clerk's hands trembled as he asked if the king had approved this. Edmund did not answer. He simply pointed to the signature already dried on the page, his own. As heir, and with the king too ill to govern, the authority was his. By noon, every credit line, every stipend, every quiet payment flowing to Marguerite's circle had gone still. Servants whispered in the corridors. Doors that were usually open stayed shut. And in her private drawing room, Lady Marguerite received the news from a shaking maid, set down her teacup with perfect calm, and said only one sentence. So the boy finally learned to read the ledgers. She smiled, but it was the smile of someone who knew a storm had just begun, and who intended to survive it. Outside her window, the palace gardens looked exactly the same. Inside those walls, everything had already changed. That evening, the question spread like fire through the palace. Why? Why would the heir humiliate his own stepmother and risk his father's fury? The answer had been growing inside Edmund for years. As a boy, he had watched his real mother, Queen Isolde, fade quietly out of the kingdom's memory after her death. Portraits were moved, rooms were repainted, and into that empty space stepped Marguerite, graceful, patient, and endlessly kind in public. But Edmund had grown up and grown observant. He noticed how the estate fund, created long ago to protect the royal children, kept shrinking. He noticed contracts signed for gardens that were never planted, and repairs to cottages that did not exist. He noticed that Marguerite's own relatives suddenly owned fine houses and horses no honest salary could buy. For a long time, he told himself he was imagining things. A prince does not accuse a queen without proof. So Edmund waited and he watched, and he began, very quietly, to collect papers. He befriended an elderly accountant named Mr. Colby, a man who had served the treasury for 40 years and carried a guilty conscience. Colby had signed things he did not understand, pressured by people above him. When Edmund finally showed him kindness instead of blame, the old man wept and opened a locked drawer. Inside were the true records, the ones never shown to the king. That was the night Edmund understood this was not carelessness. It was a slow, deliberate draining of the crown's oldest fund, hidden behind Marguerite's warm public smile. He sat alone until dawn, staring at the numbers, feeling something cold settle in his chest. He was not angry anymore. He was decided. He would not shout. He would not accuse in public and be called a jealous, grieving son. He would do the one thing that could not be argued with, the one thing that would force the truth into the light. He would freeze the accounts and let everyone see who panicked first, because guilty people do not stay quiet when their money stops. They act, and when they act, they make mistakes. Marguerite did not panic. That was the first thing that worried Edmund. For 3 days she said nothing. She attended dinner beside the ailing king, spoke gently to the staff, and behaved as though nothing had happened. Then on the 4th day she requested a private meeting with the heir. Edmund agreed. She arrived in his study dressed in soft gray, no jewels, looking like a tired, wounded woman, and for a moment even he almost doubted himself. She spoke first, and her voice was calm and sad. She told him she understood his grief, that she had never tried to replace his mother, that any errors in the accounts were the fault of dishonest servants she would gladly help him punish. She offered peace. She offered to explain everything. She even offered to step back from the estate fund entirely, if only he would quietly restore it and spare the family a public scandal that could shame the dying king. It was a masterful performance. A weaker man would have folded. But Edmund had spent nights with those ledgers, and he had learned something about her that she did not know he knew. He slid a single page across the desk, a letter in her own handwriting instructing the Treasury to move funds into an account under her sister's married name, dated only weeks earlier, long after she claimed to have stopped. The color left her face. For the first time the graceful mask cracked. Her eyes hardened and the sad widow vanished. What sat before Edmund now was the real Marguerite, sharp, cornered, and dangerous. "You have no idea what you've started," she said quietly. "The king loves me. The court needs stability, and you are a boy playing at being a king." Edmund did not raise his voice. He told her the accounts would remain frozen, that an independent review would examine every payment of the last 30 years, and that she was welcome to explain each one publicly if she preferred. Her pride, the very thing that had let her rule the shadows for so long, would not let her back down or beg. She stood, straightened her spine, and walked out promising war. And that was exactly the mistake Edmund had been waiting for. A quiet, guilty woman is hard to expose. A proud, furious one exposes herself. What followed was not a battle of swords, but of truth, and truth is patient. Marguerite went to the king, weeping, insisting the heir had betrayed the family. But King Havard, though weak, was not a fool, and he had loved Queen Isolde once too. He asked to see the papers himself. Edmund did not gloat. He simply laid everything before his father, the false contracts, the hidden letter, the missing years of the children's fund, and let the numbers speak. The old king read in silence for a long time. Then he set the pages down, looked at his son, and for the first time in years saw not a grieving boy but a ruler. He ordered the review to continue in full, and he did not stop it. In the weeks that followed, the quiet truths came loose one by one. Servants who had feared Marguerite began to speak. Her relatives, so eager for luxury, could not explain their sudden wealth. The proud walls she had built around herself became the very evidence against her. She was never dragged out in chains. The crown protected its own dignity. Instead she withdrew, stripped of her control over the fund, to a distant estate, remembered by the court not as the gentle widow she had played, but as the woman who nearly drained a kingdom's future and lost it all to her own pride. And Crown Prince Edmund. He restored the children's fund, every coin of it, and set new rules so that no smiling face could ever quietly rob the crown again. The palace called him cold, calculating, ruthless. Perhaps he was. But he had learned the hardest royal lesson of all, that kindness without watchfulness is simply an open door for those who smile the widest. On the night the review closed, Edmund walked alone to the old portrait of his mother, finally returned to its proper hall. He looked up at her painted eyes for a long moment. Then he whispered 2 words, "It's finished," and turned toward the throne room, where a tired old king was already waiting to hand him something far heavier than a frozen fund. A crown, and the weight of never being fooled again.